Greetings from planet Weatherall.
It's a lovely place to be, planet Weatherall.
I imagine it is. So we're ready to go, and this is this person, it's stupid and inane to do introductions of someone you're about to have a conversation with, but I think we can suffice to say that this is someone with a few decades of idiosyncratic adventures under their belts, and we're going to be hearing some music and some sparkling conversation.
Hopefully.
I think. Although you might go into deadpan mode now and dead it out.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about was just when I was leaving the hotel today, I was listening to the inaugural John Peel lecture. And it was Pete Townsend talking about whether John Peelism could survive the internet. And he was waffling on quite a lot about how people stealing music meant that they were stealing his son's bicycle. But he did have this interesting idea about how John Peelism, John Peel, the UK radio DJ, for any of you who don't know, was all about listening without prejudice. And I wondered what you thought about that, whether listening without prejudice and listening kind of in a really open way could exist in the internet age.
Well, no, it does exist. I mean, because there's an infinite amount of music out there. But personally speaking, the tyranny of choice kicks in, and I try and be open-minded. But with so much on offer, I have to have kind of, as I was speaking to you, talking to you earlier, I have to have kind of some kind of cultural buffers, and some of them are quite inane. You know, as I was saying to you, it can be. I like the music, but the lead singer's shoes aren't really doing it for me. That sounds a bit trite, but I do try and be as open-minded as possible. But you do have to employ some sort of cultural filter because there is so much on offer. There's rampant John Peelism. It is basically the tyranny of choice. There's too much jam on the shelves.
Because you were telling me before about a scientific study where a supermarket introduced more brands of jam and then saw their jam sales plummet.
Yeah, it's basically, I think it's Harvard did it, and they basically approached the supermarket and said, how many sorts of jam have you got? Well, we've got 5, and then gradually over the weeks they introduced more until there was 20 different brands of jam, and then conversely the sales of jam actually fell because people would just turn up and go, oh, too much jam. And that's like a bit, sometimes when you go onto the internet, it is, you to look for music, you just get that there's too much jam kind of feeling, and then you have to start employing kind of cultural filters and being a little bit more picky, you know.
What do you think? I mean, you kind of mentioned sort of semi-jokingly about shoes. Do you know what your cultural filters are?
Depends what sort of music is. If it's kind of psych music, sort of 60s music, and it's treading that line between kind of psych and prog music, anything more than 2 time signature changes in a track, then I'm out of there. You know, or more than 3 or 4 changes of key, I'm out of there. You know, there's kind of musical cultural filters, kind of little rules that I adapt. With disco music as well, there's a sort of cheese line. You know, if a track strays too far over the cheese line and gets a little bit too cheesy, then I'm out of there. It's kind of little musical kind of notes that are my cut-off point, really.
Obviously, primarily you're a DJ and you've been DJing in clubs and running clubs for a long time, and we are going to talk about you and nightclubs, because nightclubs are kind of the incubator of pretty much, well, not everything you've been involved with, but certainly a fair portion of it. But I think a good place to kind of kick off musically is to talk about you and remixes. We will go back in time and talk about some of the early remixes, but can we hear one of the remixes you've done more recently?
Okay, if you really want.
Yes. While you're selecting something, before you play this for us, you don't deal with MP3s, do you?
I have been known to. You know, high-res ones are all right, but I very rarely download stuff. I mean, I don't. You know, if I walk into a club I know immediately if the DJ is using Serato and playing MP3s, because it'll be, to my ears, the sound's just a little bit kind of harsh in the sort of upper mid area, and they're trying to compensate. You get to the mixer, and all the EQs around, they're trying to sort of put in back the frequencies that have been taken out, and it never works. And the sound engineer's scratching his head. Oh, the sound system doesn't usually sound like this. It's like, well, go and have a look what they're using, what software they're using. Go and have a look at the mixer and see what's it. Then that'll kind of explain everything. But I mean, I'm not totally anti them. They're quite useful to listen to stuff. But I'll then, if possible, go and hunt the vinyl out. Right, do you want to hear this? This is a remix of Soft Rocks, who are a kind of Balearic-y disco outfit, but not anymore. There you get the general idea. Oh, thank you very much. God bless you all. Now, believe it or not, I'm quite a big fan of the Cramps.
So you kind of answered that already, but in your head, what were you turning that record into?
Well, the original was a sort of steppers dub tune. There's not a great deal left of the original, I'll be honest with you. But it's like when I do a remix, even if it's a destruction job, there's still got to be the spirit of the track. And it was a great dub track, and we were going to do a dub mix, and then thought, well, what's the point of that? They'll just have 2 dub mixes. So the bass line's adapted. The bass line was a kind of standard kind of dub style bass line. So we just adapted that, pretty much playing the same thing, but in a bit more of a kind of rock and roll style. The vocals, that's what kind of led me to do it like that, was because the vocals were kind of an old school rock and roll sounding vocal. And then the trumpet. So I always loved A Certain Ratio's early work with Martin Hannett and those kind of discordant trumpets. And my engineer can play the trumpet, but not very well, and is really good at discordant trumpet blasts. And it's him playing the bass. And that was it. It was just that's with any remix, is to retain the spirit, but turn it into something else. I mean, it would help if I had the original here, but take my word for it. It was a pretty sort of straight up, great track, but a straight up dub track.
Well, when you say a kind of destruction job, but you have to keep the spirit of something, how do you find the spirit of a piece of music then? Is it just about what you like in it, or are you kind of approximating a kind of parallel universe version of it?
Well, it can be. It's with some tracks, if the track's totally electronic, then we'll try and we'll do like we'll do a cover version. I did a remix for Ricardo Villalobos. I can't remember the name of the track, but it was like a minimal, very surprise for Ricardo, a minimal techno track.
No.
But yeah.
Nine.
But the bass line, it was reminiscent. I know he listens to a lot of music, and the bass line sounded like an old Joy Division bass line or something. So we copied the bass line in a more kind of Joy Division style, and then did live drums. But conversely, if I get something that's live, if it's a live bass line or live drums, then I'll go the opposite way and do. I suppose it's an approximation and a cover version of what you've been sent. But another good way of doing it is as well. It's not so much now, but 10, 15 years ago, you'd get all the parts on a DAT, and there'd always be written on the DAT, tracks 20 to 25 do not use. Guess what we use, because they're all the little mistakes and all the little fuck ups and you can twist and put back in the track, and it gives gives it a little kind of edge to things. I've always loved mistakes. They're always they're always a good into. It's the hidden beauty of things in all art. Are the little mistakes. When things are too perfect, I think they're they can be a bit off-putting. But the art I like, whether it's painting or books, have always got a weird little thing in there that shouldn't be happening, and that's what you don't get it so much now, because everything's you get sent it via computer, and you don't they've edited it before that they send it to you. But 10, 15 years ago, you'd get DATs, and every time I did a remix on the DAT there would be do not use. So that's the first thing we used.
You mentioned Martin Hannett, and I would definitely want to ask you about him. But before that, can you explain who the we are that you're talking about?
Oh, so yeah, I work with an engineer. He's called Tim Fairplay. And he was the guitarist in a band called Batant, who are kind of electro Susie and the Banshees, for want of a much better description.
And so you earlier when we were chatting described yourself as a kind of producer in the kind of old sense of the word. So you work with an engineer when you're producing and remixing.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, I've never claimed to be a technical wizard. Obviously over the years, my technical ability has improved, but I've always kept a little bit of a back seat because I enjoy working with people and learning stuff. And also, if you're sitting at home reading manuals, you can't go to clubs or go out, or listen to records. So I've always kept a little bit of a distance. And in the sort of 50s and 60s, the producer was usually allied to the, it's like a film producer. Who's in charge of getting everything together. Is the producer's in charge of everything behind the camera, the director's in charge of everything in front of the camera. In the 50s and 60s, the producer would arrange the sessions. He would know what session musicians to bring in if they played in a certain style. He'd know what studios to put them in. He would come up with string arrangements or know who to call in for the string arrangements. And that's kind of from day one. Because my first foray into the studio was as an ideas person, because I straddled two worlds, the worlds of kind of disco and house music and the world of indie music. I was brought in, when I did Hallelujah with Paul Oakenfold. The reason I was brought in is because he'd come from a kind of soul background, and I'd come from more of a sort of punk, post-punk, indie kind of background. And I was brought in as a kind of advisor, and that's kind of what I've been doing for the past 20 years, really.
See, the funny thing about that was, we were chatting kind of an hour or so ago about this kind of, during the acid house times at acid house clubs, you actually heard like a really massive range of music, certainly in the south, in London. In Manchester or in Leeds, you might have just heard Chicago house music, and obviously in Chicago you heard other stuff, Chicago house music, whatever. But certainly in London acid house clubs, you heard a whole load of stuff. And for ages, like I was going to those things when I was really, really young, and we'd be hearing these records, this particular track that we just called the Bells track, because it had bells in it, and none of us we didn't know what they were. But it was really interesting for me to hear that some of the DJs who were on that scene didn't necessarily know what those records were.
All those early DJs, Johnny Walker, Paul Oakenfold, Danny Rampling, they were kind of soul boys, basically. They come from the soul and disco scene. I suppose 86, 87, they went out to Ibiza and heard Alfredo playing, and he was playing a mad mixture of like early house stuff, but then he'd be throwing in stuff like the Residents and the Wooden Tops, and those Rampling and Oakenfold, etc. They didn't really know. They knew they liked that music, but they didn't really know it's not the world they were from. But they found out what those records were, then brought them back with them to London and tried to recreate Amnesia in Streatham High Road, which was
the Project Club,
which was some job, believe me, if you've seen Streatham High Road. And so yeah, that wasn't the area that they were from, and that's what attracted me at first to early acid house, is because at the age of 24 I was a jaded clubber. I'd been going to clubs for 10 years. I was a little bit bored with Rare Groove, and if you're going out at the weekends and going to Throbbing Gristle gigs in a certain ratio, Rare Groove isn't going to really cut it. So if you go to a club that's kind of catering, I've always been a kind of confused, am I a punk rocker, am I a soul boy? And those early acid house clubs in London were ideal because they had a kind of disco element, but they also had a harder sort of post-punk indie kind of side to them, which is what attracted me to them in the first place.
So clubs have definitely been an important part all the way through for you. What you said that by 24 you were a jaded clubber. So where was your 14-year-old self going out?
Soul weekenders and disco. I was kind of quite into sort of Brit funk, Olympic Runners and High Tension and things like that. And also I liked that scene. It was at the same time as punk was happening as well. And there was that big thing, you're never supposed to, disco sucks and all that kind of carry on. But I never saw that because soul clubs were always great places. You could dress up. They were. I mean, punk started. I'd hate to break it to you, because punk's a very political scene. But the initial punk scene in London was a load of bored soul boys who liked dressing up, and that's pretty much what I was at the age of 14, as a kind of bored soul boy that liked
You're a
dressing up.
14-year-old, so bored, so young.
I'll talk you through the look. It was a peroxide wedge with a black underneath, pegged pegged panel pegged trousers, rubber sandals, and a mohair jumper. I mean, that whole kind of early punk thing, the mohair jumpers and stuff, was a kind of throwback from the soul scene. And as I said, you could go to those things without fear. Obviously, you ran the risk of being beaten up on your way to the club, but once you were in the club, you were quite safe.
Because certainly, kind of fashion in the 80s in London could definitely get you beaten up, couldn't it?
Well, try fashion in the late 70s in Berkshire. That's even, you're to London, the cosmopolitan city, yeah, risky. But walking around a small Berkshire town with blue hair and matching blue tartan trousers in 1978, yeah, was quite a risk. But
this is a risk that you continue to perhaps enjoy.
Oh yeah, I'm forever. Yeah. What you mean do you want that anecdote?
That's up to you.
Are we steering away from music here into
we were actually
the area of high fashion?
You brought up fashion, not me.
No, I'll keep that. I'll keep that one.
Okay,
For maybe we'll move that on to later. Yeah.
Maybe. But let's get back to some music. Is there another remix that you want to play us? Another kind of recent bit before we start heading into the depths of Beyond?
The depths of Beyond.
Yeah.
What does that entail? I'm intrigued.
It's the olden days.
The olden days.
Yeah, the olden days.
Well, let's. Okay, let's see. I'll see if I can find something. What did you express an interest in the? Was it the wooden ships?
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear the wooden ships. This is a track called Crossing. It's off their latest album. I don't know whether it's going to be released or what's happening with it, but anyway, this is it. General idea, it's the same formula. Thank you. It's the same formula as the last one, which is basically a gas-powered drum machine, a Roland Space Echo, which we kind of have on all the time, and then an arpeggio courtesy of an MS-20 with an MS-20 sequencer, again, kind of a bit broken and liable to kind of fall apart at any time. But that's kind of our formula, so, tape echo and old machines that are on the verge of giving up the ghost.
So if that's the kind of the recipe, I guess, for the remixes you're doing at the moment, what was the recipe for the early records, the early remixes?
It was pretty much whatever's. I mean, it's the recipe at the moment because that's what we've got in the studio. We've got we kind of collect lots of tape echoes and tape delays. But earlier on, my first forays into studios they were kind of proper studios. They were big studios, and they had the latest samplers, and they're all very, very daunting. So the early stuff was, yeah, pretty much all kind of really sample based. Like you said, indie dance was just basically slinging a funk breakbeat underneath a rock band, which is pretty much what it was, really. But then it depends what studio I'm in or what kit I've got in my own studio. I'm not sort of precious about stuff. There's a certain sound I like that you can only get with old tape echoes and certain guitar amps. Like we use a Fender Twin, which is pretty good. Standard kind of sort of rock and roll guitar amp. But I've never, we use computers for sequencing, and we use like the drums, the sort of that's a Simmons kit, but it's a sample of. We're not averse to using samples, and I'm kind of painted as, a lot of people when I do interviews, it's like, oh, so you're a bit of a Luddite, No, I don't. That'd be stupid to totally dismiss the digital element of remixing because it's very handy. But we just like to. David Toop, the music journalist, he called it actuality, where music seems to exist somewhere other than within the computer. And our way of doing that, and for about the last 10 years or so, is to take it out of the computer and put it through some valves, or put it through a reel-to-reel, or just take it out of the computer. Even if you're going back in again, just give it some air. And if you're recording something, even if it's just one element, if it's a synth, put it through an amp, record it with a mic, so you're getting the room as well. Just give it a little it may not seem like you're doing a lot, but the end result, I mean, I always get kids coming up to me saying, I've done a track, I've done it in the computer, but it just doesn't quite sound right. And that'll always be my answer to them. Well, take it out of the computer. Just, buy an old reel-to-reel, run it through that. Buy something, buy something old with valves, even if it doesn't actually work, but the valves are still operating, and then put it back into the computer. And that's pretty much why that sort of sounds like it does. It's just, our studio is it's a kind of world of echo, really.
So it's quite a big difference, isn't there, between the world of echo, which you've kind of built for yourself and developed over the years, and the kind of, the young you walking into a big studio and being told to do a remix. I mean, is that how it worked? Did you go into the studio to do the remix?
Yeah, basically it was what Orson Welles described. How, they asked him, how did you make Citizen Kane? Not that I'm liking myself to the great man or anything, but, how did you make Citizen Kane when you were 23? He said, well, it was the confidence of ignorance. He didn't really know what the rules were. He didn't, and that's what I was, that's what it's like when I was sort of 24, 25, going into that studio. It was daunting, but that kind of ignorance, I kind of used it to my advantage, because I'd say, can we do this? And the engineer would say no. It's like, right, okay, let's do it then. It was kind of that gung ho. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that I was breaking the rules, because I didn't know what the rules were. Mm-hmm. I think as you get on, as you know more about how a studio works and how the machines work, I think you kind of sometimes you lose a bit of that confidence. The more you educate yourself, the more you realise how uneducated you are.
Yeah, the kind of reverse.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's like
of knowledge. Yeah. When you think about those early remixes, though, I mean, do you ever listen to them? Do you ever kind of like play them out as a little gift to the people that are listening, or are they strictly kind of out of bounds?
Well, no, they were up until sort of 5 or 6 years ago, because, as I say, obviously as I learnt more about production techniques, I'd hear those tracks and go, oh, that drum's looped a bit wrong, or that shouldn't happen. But it's like with Loaded, the classic case in point. I mean, if we had it here, I could point out all the mistakes. Like the drums are looped wrongly, but it's the naive charm. Again, it's it's like I was saying earlier about finding those mistakes in other people's stuff as an entry in. It's that naivety. I think that that means they still resonate. They resonate today. It can kind of make them a little bit more timeless as well. Because you've not laboured over the programming too much. You've just gone in and gone, right, that's the beat, do that. It's a little bit more functional. And as I say, it's that naivety that I think I'm beginning to warm to. There was a stage as I was learning more about the studio, and I was kind of a bit snotty about the productions I'd done. It's like, oh, they're a bit simple. But that's the very thing that people like about them. Absolutely. I mean,
the wonders of YouTube means that we could easily listen to a kind of My Bloody Valentine or a Primal Scream, should you want to.
Well, whatever you want. You're in charge.
Okay. Well, I think it's a My Bloody Valentine moment then.
Is it?
I think it might be, or is it not?
I don't know. Was that
I'm just
shout
asking
for something?
No, I'm just checking if it's all right with you.
Did someone just shout neither?
Who said neither? I've been getting requests all morning. Naff off, the lot of you. Right. Where did I get it ready? I got it ready somewhere.
I mean, this is a case in point. I mean, this track, I'd not heard it for years. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was at a festival and I heard it on a very big sound system and thought, well, this is actually not too bad. And the young people seem to like it as well.
The young people. Right, why won't this play? We're on channel...
Should be on that one, are you not?
Yeah.
The phrase that I hear pretty much every weekend from people who go on after me with Serato, why is that not working there?
That's not...
No.
Bloody YouTube. See, the internet's rubbish, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, anyway, so what, do you want me to talk you through that one, or...?
No.
No, okay, let's move on. Moving swiftly on.
Let's move on. One thing I did want to ask you about Loaded, about the Primal Scream stuff, which actually was more of a kind of remix, the kind of line between remix and production at that point kind of gets a bit skewed. I mean, maybe there is no difference between the two. But the one thing I wanted to ask you is the Robert Johnson line, which is in there, which Bobby Gillespie re-sung. Is that right?
Which, I can't, what, we want to get loaded or?
No, because that's from the film, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, okay then. So this is going nowhere as well. Once you've had a YouTube error, that's it. The whole thing's just like.
I mean that was.
Off.
I mean, to be honest, that was a great start. That's sowed the seed in my head of total destruction, because I did a version of it, a first version of it, which was I just basically slung a kick drum underneath their original, and because I was a little bit scared, because I thought they would be precious about their baby, about their artwork, you know. Did the version. Andrew Innes from the band came down, listened to it. He went, it's not bad, but just fucking destroy it. That was his words. Just fucking destroy it, in a broad Glaswegian accent. And so that to have that said to you, it's been ringing in my head for 20 years, him saying fucking destroy it. So that kind of made me realise that bands may not be so precious about their art. It transpires that some of them actually are quite precious about their art. I mean, that was a case in point with the My Bloody Valentine. They did actually, members of the band came down to see what I was doing, and they didn't actually, to their credit, they just wanted to see what the process was. They weren't precious, but there have been bands that have sent it's usually the drummer for some reason, I don't know, because it's usually probably his stuff that I get rid of first, or make his drums into a shorter loop. But I soon made it very clear that I wouldn't stand for musicians in the studio while I was working. Something I stand by to this day. I rarely have them in one at a time and for a shorter time as possible. So
you took part in the Screamadelica 20th anniversary tour. How was that?
It was great, because there was a lot riding on it for them, and if they'd have maintained their lifestyle, shall we say, that they had 20 years ago, it'd have been an absolute shambles. But I think the fact I kind of knew that it was going to be good when the first night backstage. Rather than kind of various underworld figures chopping out lines of coke on a table, there was a huge basket of fruit and vegetables and a juicer. Bobby's he's very focused, contrary to popular belief. Because there's obviously a myriad of stories. Whenever you mention the Primal Scream, whenever I do an interview about Primal Scream, people want to know kind of crazy anecdotes. But Bobby's he's very, very focused, and he knows that if you want to carry on doing what you love doing, and you get to a certain point and a certain age, that if you carry on with that lifestyle, it's not gonna happen. So they were very, very focused. They got the sound right. They spent a lot of time to getting it right, and it was a joy. It was a joy to watch it. I mean, I loved them 20 years ago. They were one of those bands that were great because any minute you thought the whole thing would fall on its arse, and it rarely did. But then a few years after that, it was a point where they were either the best band in the world you've ever seen, or without doubt the worst. And they've kind of harnessed that energy from those times, but without the pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm. See, the funny thing for me with them about a reunion tour is that there's a kind of natural tendency to think like, I mean, I know that they didn't need to reunite because there wasn't a kind of necessarily a split in the same way, but I'm interested in how you can be into kind of old music, i.e. I suppose a kind of nostalgia, and yet still not be reverent and still manage to keep it kind of like raw and interesting and not kind of nostalgic. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, it depends what you're doing. I mean, it's because Screamadelica, I think, still resonates 20 years later. I think it's quite a timeless record. If you're doing an album that's actually rooted in a certain era and it's immediately identifiable, although that album is very identifiable with Acid House, it still resonated with future generations. So if you're doing something timeless, then that's fair enough. I think it's going to work. But if you're doing something that's particularly pinpointed to a certain time, then you're just going to get kind of a certain old school audience, and it's not. You were at Olympia. It was from 14 to 60. It was right across the generations, which I think is why it worked. It is because I think it's a timeless record.
So I guess moving away from that period of time and kind of into another whole area of music which you've mined more recently. Because the thing is, we could spend 2 hours talking about that one thing. We could spend 2 hours talking about like one particular area.
Yeah, but we'd be the only two left. I was about an hour and a half, I'd imagine, if that.
So can we talk about rockabilly a minute?
We can. I mean, that was not rockabilly per se, but rock and roll was my. It was the first music that made me go funny and gave me goosebumps when I was about 11, which was 1974. It was a two-pronged rock and roll attack. I mean, there was a film called That'll Be the Day, which was about the transition from late 50s rock and roll into rhythm and blues, and had a great classic rock and roll soundtrack. But there was also a bit of a kind of 50s revival going on in the mid-70s as well. So that was which kind of spanned. It was kind of, I saw when I heard glam rock, I knew that it was pretty much basic blues rock and roll, but with kind of spangly trousers and silly hats and stuff like that. Made that connection. So that was the first music that really moved me. Was classic kind of mid to late 50s rock and roll. I was only 11 or 12 at the time, so I didn't know where it had come from. It was only later. It was only probably during punk or just after punk when I discovered the Cramps, which led me to rockabilly, which took me back to pre kind of late 50s rock and roll as we know it.
So you've been doing rockabilly sets. I mean, because I've seen you do. I just saw you do the rockabilly set at the Port Eliot Festival, for example. Where are you doing those? Are you doing those? Whereabouts are you being booked to do those? And are you playing rockabilly stuff in?
Well, yeah,
in your
you
space disco
you
sets?
have to be quite careful. People want me to play an eclectic set, start with rockabilly and then go into house and techno. I'd love to say that in my world that works, but in most people's world it just doesn't work. You have to kind of keep it. I can see the link between rockabilly and disco. I mean, that link for me is, certain rockabilly records, the way the guitar is played, it's like a percussive style, and it inhabits a time and space all of its own. You listen to certain rockabilly records, like Johnny Burnett records, and the guitar just kind of hangs in this weird time and space, and it's the same with great disco records. It's a kind of percussive guitar style that you can't quite put your finger on of where it is timing-wise, and that's my link when people ask me how can you like rockabilly and how can you like disco. They're both dance music, and they both have a kind of it's that percussive guitar sound that just sort of hangs in its own in its own mysterious space.
Have you got any of your rockabilly stuff
No.
with you? Great.
Well, no, I got the call. Yes, I got a text yesterday at 7:00 in the evening. Bring some music, and sadly, too late. Or I was like, unless you want to troll the internet for some Johnny Burnett or something.
I have got some stuff there, but I'm now a bit nervous about.
It was a debacle last time you tried.
I know, it really was. We could attempt one more debacle. I mean, you said you like mistakes.
Well, it's up to you. If you find, I don't know if you find.
While I'm having a look for something and to see if it actually is going to work here.
Right.
Can you? Do you think that you're kind of naturally interested in music that maybe is slightly less mined than perhaps?
No, not
the mainstream.
I'm not willfully obscure. I've still liked. I got into me. Glam rock was pop music. It was chart music. After all, I've got nothing against pop music, whatsoever. When I was 16, I was going to Throbbing Gristle gigs, but was also quite partial to a bit of Bananarama. I was, honestly. Cheers Then by Bananarama is great.
Cheers
record.
Then, that's the one, is it?
Yeah.
No, this isn't going too well here, I'm afraid. Okay, so if you're going to make some rockabilly recommendations, what are they going to be?
You got Johnny Burnett, really.
Okay.
Rockabilly music.
No, we're just
Okay.
computers.
All right.
Not having it. Okay then, so you're DJing tomorrow, aren't you?
I am indeed, yeah, in Lyon.
In Lyon.
Yeah.
and obviously you still DJ all the time, all over the place. What kind of, and you're doing your night as well as at the moment,
I am
aren't you?
indeed.
Okay then, so let's go there then in our minds.
Okay.
Tell us about the club night that you're doing at the moment.
Well, I do a club night called A Love from Outer Space, which is named after a track by A.R. Kane. Kind of forgotten boys of English kind of post-punk, and they were actually involved. They were part of Mars, who did Pump Up the Volume. It's a track I've loved for ages, and it's a name I've wanted to steal for quite some time. Basically, the club it's 100 people. It's in the basement of a bar. It's pretty down tempo. I mean, the motto is never knowingly exceeding 120 BPMs. So it's kind, and it was also been described. I did a set recently at a festival in Croatia, and a young lad came up to me, all excited. He's like, "What do you call that music?" I said, "I don't know." He goes, "I think I'm going to call it drug chug." So we've got a drug chug club in Stoke Newington called A Love from Outer Space, but it's kind of mid tempo. For want of I don't like the word cosmic disco because it's been overused, and we don't play a great deal. We would play the old re-edit, but it's mainly new music around the sort of 110 to 115 BPM, kind of spacey, dubby disco music.
Now you've run clubs at various points in your kind of...
Yes.
I'm loath to use the word career in your...
Yes, you know I don't like that word.
I
My
know.
job.
Yes, your job.
There's a big difference between
in
job
fact,
and
perhaps
career.
you might like to break down your views on the difference between music as a job and music as a career.
It's, as I was saying to you earlier, it's if you're involved in art in any way and you describe what you do as a job, people think somehow you're demeaning it, that art is produced by people that live in this ethereal world that, you know, without much basis in without actually working. But it always has been a job to me. It's a great job, but it is a job of work. I do treat it like going to work. It's why I don't have my studio in my house, is because I like to think I'm going to work. I get up in the morning and I go somewhere to work. But there's a big difference between that and a career. I've never thought of it as a career. I've never had a, so where will you be in 5 years' time, and a career plan, and like I must be at this point of the ladder. I've never seen it like that. I think that careerism in art in general, not just music, is a kind of dangerous thing, because you can if your plan isn't working, you can start cutting corners, and you may make artistic decisions based on money or where you think you should be on the career ladder.
So the other clubs, before you, obviously you've got this club at the moment. In the very beginning when you started Boyzone, which started off as a fanzine and then became a label, that was parties rather than a club so much, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, we put on the odd party. This was pre-Acid House, and to not much success. But then when kind of by default Boyzone became the in-house magazine of Acid House, we started putting on parties, some of which have become pretty seminal. There was one in East Grinstead on the shores of a lake, which was quite good. There was one where we didn't know the farm. We didn't know that the land that we rented from the farmer belonged to the Queen, but apparently it did. And I remember afterwards being hounded by the Sun newspaper, trying to get comments like, "How dare you hold an Acid House rave on Her Majesty's land?" And the answer, didn't know, Gov, honest, wasn't good enough for them. That was the first foray, and then it was a few years later that I did a club called Sabre Sonic. We put on the first ever Chemical Brothers gig, I seem to remember. They played on the roof of the cloakroom because the stage was set up. I don't know what was going on. We couldn't put them on the stage, but we basically, I don't know whether it's a question of room or whether perversely we just thought it'd be funny to have them playing on top of the cloakroom, probably the latter. We had Richie Horton playing early gigs, Alter Ego playing early gigs, and it infused. It was the first club that kind of infused the sound that I was making in the studio, which I think is where we're going with this line of questioning, because A Love from Outer Space has basically infused pretty much all of the remixes I've done for the past 18 months. I make the records, I do the remixes with the club in mind. I mean, I do. If you're making dance remixes, you have got to pretty much be on the coalface and be in the club every weekend. But this specifically is really the first club in about 5 or 6 years to kind of actually infuse the sound that I'm making in the studio.
I mean, I do definitely want to know about how the music that you kind of hear in clubs or in the clubs that you put together ends up in the studio. But I'm also interested to know kind of what to you makes a good club.
Well, the obvious, you know, a good sound system, a lighting man that's not too overzealous, because you play some places, you know, at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, you don't really want to be seeing the person opposite you, or think that the person opposite you is seeing you. A dark room, a small, probably 200-300 people, tops, a well-balanced sound system that you can feel in your chest, but isn't hurting your ears. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the basics really, and obviously a good clientele, a mixed clientele. Not a lot of shaven-headed blokes with obscure techno label T-shirts. That was a part of my career about 15 years ago.
This was during the techno phase. Well, not
yeah.
the techno is necessarily
I'm thinking of the Orbit in Morley in particular.
So the Orbit in Morley was a kind of quite legendary techno club in the UK, but had a reputation for being kind of quite hardcore.
Oh, it's very hardcore. I mean, it was because of where it was. Morley, it was an old industrial. It was the industrial heartland of Yorkshire, the heart of which had been ripped out over the years. So it's still this kind of quite intense, hard place, and it was it was kind of, you know, if you go to the Orbit and you're a success, that you've kind of, it's like getting your techno wings, really. And I remember playing my first night there. They liked it quite fast, so I had everything at +8 on the decks, and I thought I was doing all right, and I could hear someone shouting behind me, and I turned round and there was a huge kind of Yorkshire bodybuilder with his top off, bright red, sweating like a dinner lady. And he just shouted the words "faster, you fucker" at me like that, and that was my welcome to the Orbit.
I always like the fact that when Juan Atkins used to play there, they used to call him Joanne.
Yeah.
Juan Atkins.
Yeah.
One more.
Yeah. There's no fancy Spanish names in Morley.
But there was definitely a period where you were, making a lot of techno and putting out techno records and supporting a kind of a part of, I don't know, it seems like a kind of slightly forgotten area of time, and I guess in the mid-90s, Lone Swordsmen's time, Emissions Audio as well, the labels that you had there. There was, I guess there'll be a point where, I haven't listened back to those records actually, some of the stuff that came out there for some time, but there was definitely a period where...
Oh yeah, no, I kind of specialise a bit more. I got into DJing by default, really. When I first started, I wasn't a DJ. I was someone that played records. Danny Ramplin and Paul Oakenfold knew that I had these kind of weird records, indie-based records. So I would get called up to play at 6 o'clock in the morning at parties when everyone was absolutely trolleyed. And I could play all this weird music. I'd play everything from Chris and Cozy, dub things, all sorts of stuff. And then I began to, as I got booked, because I was associated with the Shum, I started getting booked by other clubs, and they'd put me on earlier, so I had to kind of learn how to mix, and went more down the sort of house and techno route. And then obviously 5 or 6 years later, after that, you're beginning to specialise even more. And the techno records at the time were great because they reminded me of the industrial kind of sound that I listened to in 1979 and 80. So I went down that route, really.
Into a techno tunnel. Never a techno tunnel, I don't think.
Yeah,
but
there was, and thankfully there was light at the end of it.
Now, one thing we have to talk about are the more recent productions. I guess this is a good time. It's a good time probably to talk about the Fuck Buttons, because you produced their second album.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And then perhaps that's a nice way of us talking about the sort of you making that leap from being a DJ to being in a band. But Fuck Buttons, can you tell us how you... Well, first of all, tell us how you got involved with them, and then let's play a track.
Well, basically, I liked their first album, and unbeknownst to me, I knew their manager, and he found out that I liked the records, it was just that really. He kind of put it to the band. It would be a good idea. I say band, it's 2 blokes and a suitcase, but he put it to them, and they were very into it, and I just thought, well, that's that's good. It's not like you're going to have to put up with drummers and lead vocalists and stuff. It is two guys, all their equipment fitted into two suitcases. It was all old Casio tones and old bits and pieces. I don't want to give away the basis of their sound too much, but it was great, and it was easy to do. And the hardest thing to do was, because all their stuff was old, was basically getting it all to sync up. That took us about a week to get it all working. And then basically I said to them, like, do the set as if you were doing it live, but do it 3 times. Do song 1, do it once. There'll be a few mistakes. Second time you'll kind of nail it. Third time you'll be a bit bored and you'll start twiddling about and doing unnecessary stuff. And then we'll do a composite of the 3 takes. We'll leave some mistakes in, we'll leave some twiddly bits in, but we'll just leave the second mix, the basis, which is the one where you nail it, as the kind of bed, and then hang everything else off it. And it was, I say, relatively painless, but everyone that's heard that album is kind of blown away with its intensity. And I always say to them, well, imagine listening to it every day for 12 hours for a month. I did physically, it felt. The feeling I had is, when I first left school, I had manual jobs, building sites and stuff like that. And it was the same feeling when I got home of an evening after a fuck button session. It was the same feeling that I remember after a day on the building site.
Instead of carrying bricks, you were carrying.
Yeah, it was a quite a harsh experience, shall we say?
Well, what do you think? Surf Solar?
Go on. It obviously won't be so bludgeoning with this dreadful sound system you're playing through here. Is that enough of that? Thank you. I mean, the thing is with that, I mean, their first album was great, but it was pretty much their live set, which they just recorded. And I said to them, basically, that's the feel I want to get, but just take it to a next sort of level, make it a little bit more produced, not soften the rough edges, but add some slight production values to it rather than just recording your live set. And that's what we did. I mean, we basically kind of toughened them up a little bit more rhythmically and just processed their sounds a little bit, just to make it a little bit bigger. But yeah, I mean, it was physically hard work, but at the same time, it was a reasonably easy process, because they've got quite a vision anyway. So they were quite easy to work with. And
was that one? I mean, how long did that take? I know you said it was just 3 takes on each track.
It took 4 weeks. It took 4 weeks. The first week was just kind of getting everything to work together and sync up and working out how we were going to do it. And then the next 3 weeks was just literally go in there, play it 3 times, sometimes maybe 4 times, and then we kind of comped things up, and they would suggest things, I would say no, and everybody was happy.
But you've also had that experience, haven't you, of being in a band and being on stage? I mean, usually people kind of do that in the first, sort of in the beginning, don't they? They're kind of like in a band and then maybe they do other stuff.
That's midlife crisis for you.
But do you think it's good to challenge yourself creatively like that, to do something difficult and out of your comfort zone?
That was the whole point of it. You know, I've been making music for 15, 20 years and was in a reasonably comfortable position, a little bit of a kind of underground ghetto, if you will, where it's very easy to sit around. We'd sit in the studio sort of saying how rubbish everything was and criticising everything. And then it dawned on me, it's like, well, this is all well and good, but it's a little bit too comfortable. What can I do? A kind of artistic equivalent of taking your clothes off and running up and standing on top of the hill, arms and legs akimbo, while everybody looks at you. So I'd sung in bands when I was a teenager, so I thought, well, that's the ideal thing. You can't get more kind of upfront than that. Is actually standing in front of a band, a band singing. That was the reason. Yeah, it was just a kind of. It wasn't just that. It wasn't artistic. It was personal as well. There were things going on in my life that I won't go into, obviously, but I needed to kind of shake myself up a little bit and put myself on offer and give people the chance to throw vegetables or shout at me, basically.
I'm going to see if I can make this work.
Right.
A track off the A Pox on the Pioneers album.
Okay.
But what was your teenage band?
Oh God, what they call? There is, I think. No, actually, I better not tell you because you'll find it. But one of them, basically, I was a factory records obsessive. So we were kind of very bad certain ratio impersonators.
Did you have people with whistles at your gigs?
No, I
and
played
flannel
I played
shorts?
timbale. Picture this. It was kind of Hitler Youth haircut, a German army vest, big shorts, a la a certain ratio, and I played timbales as well, and some, because the timbale was a kind of big part of the certain ratio sound, and we were called A Fractured Touch, and then we changed our name to The Other Side. Yeah, dreadful.
Excellent. All right, well, let's see. Let's have a little spin.
Or not as the case. No, that's not how it should sound.
That's not how it should sound.
No.
I apologise.
That sounded a bit like a Kevin Shields remix,
yeah,
but it's not. That's not exactly what it. That's not what it was.
Perhaps he's done the same thing for you.
Yeah.
So, you were in bands with. You started off kind of making that process to being in bands, and then 2 years ago, 2009, you did this album, kind of by yourself under your own name.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was. It was a collaborative process, but I was more in control, and I'd actually written a lot more of the music and actually written the songs, lyrically as well. I mean, the process started with the two Lone Swordsmen album. Don't ask me what year, but that was the start of the process, and it just kind of carried on. I got back into kind of songwriting and a little bit more structured kind of songwriting, and that's how Pox on the Pioneers came about.
And kind of what's happening next with that? Is there another one coming?
Well, there's another one recorded, but that won't see the light of day because I fell out with the person that I made it with. But I'm quite pleased. Not that I fell out with him, but I'm quite pleased that I've got one of those kind of. I'm now a producer that's got one of those albums that's kind of lost, whose the myth of which far outweighs actually how good it is. Like my version of Dennis Wilson's Bamboo album. That kind of leaks out over years, and as I say, whose myth far outweighs any critical worth it may have.
But if there's not another kind of
there's another one I'm working on.
Yeah,
I'm working on another one. Partly due to the Screamadelica 20 years thing, and obviously backed up by my prodigious talent, meant that I've been offered lots of remixes over the past 2 years. So I've concentrated on that because. The fickle wheel of show business, it goes round and round, and it points to you every now and again. So I kind of capitalise on that, earn some money, and then when you kind of fall out of favour, that means you can sit in your studio for a year, knowing that you can pay the rent and get on with your own stuff. Hopefully, produce a good album, a good record that puts you back into the wheel of show business, which goes round ad infinitum for the past 20 years. So I've been doing lots of remixes, but at the same time kind of working on my own stuff. I've got a body of work which at the moment is instrumentals, which I'll then disappear into my studio and write songs and do vocals for.
But you have got, you've done a number of compilations over time, from 9 o'clock drop, which kind of I guess preceded a lot of people's, although the more general interest in post-punk. And then the Rockabilly compilation, and now you've got another one coming out.
Yeah, I'm doing one for Ministry of Sound, which is basically a Love from Outer Space orientated. It's three CDs. The first, it starts with my cover version of A Love from Outer Space, and the first CD is just basically all my remixes mixed together for the first hour, and then the second 2 CDs are kind of representative of the club, and it ends with A.R. Kane's original version. A DJ journey, if you will.
A wheel which has come.
No, let's not use that horribly overused DJ journey phrase.
So do you have anything with you that's going to end up on the compilation?
No. I might have my version of Love from Outer Space.
That would be good.
I don't know. There's a hardcore A.R. Kane fans that I'm going to upset with this, but I think we've done a reasonably good job. I was very, very pleased with. I did a cover version of the Gun Club's Sex Beat, which is one of my favourite tracks, and David Holmes, when he lived in New York, was playing it at a club, when in Who Should Walk In but Kid Congo Powers, guitarist with the Gun Club and later the Cramps, who came up and asked David whose version this was and said how great it was, which is kind of one of my highlights of my show business career, is getting the nod for my cover version by an ex-member of the Gun Club. Oh, what's it? No, that's not it. That's it. This is Love From Outside. So much. I must say, featuring some of my finest tambourine work I think I've ever done, that one.
Now, obviously, you're, probably, maybe not best, we probably are best known as a DJ, although obviously all the other stuff is kind of there pretty much in equal capacity.
Yeah. A polymath, if you will.
A polymath, indeed. A Renaissance man of many types. But the thing is, I imagine that you're someone who has more favourite bands than you do have favourite DJs.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So what for you makes a great band great?
They've got to come across like a gang. They've got to look good. So they've got to come across like a gang, and they've got to sound like they mean it. Really, again, pretty basic, but that to me, I'll listen to music. Again, it's back to that careerist thing. I've got to listen to a band and think, well, these people couldn't possibly do anything else but this. You listen to the Cramps and you think, well, they're not fit for normal employment, are they? And it's the same with the Clash, the same with Joy Division, the same with any number of my favourite bands. It's just like these people are doing this because they absolutely have to. There was no other thing they could possibly do, and they've got to do this, whether it kills them or makes them millionaires. They've got to be doing it.
And I guess it kind of, the same is true for you, really, isn't it? You couldn't. I can't imagine that you would be doing anything else apart from music in some shape or form, even if you were probably just doing it for a small amount of people.
Yeah, possibly. But if someone said to me, "I'm going to sponsor you. I'm going to pay your living expenses and wages for the next 5 years and set you up in a painting studio and printing studio," it'd be a tough. I know you shouldn't really say this to people at a Red Bull Music Academy that, given enough money and enough oil paints, you'd knock it on the head. But that would be, that would be the tough choice to make. Because I was, I did art I'm a failed. I tried to get into art school because I thought that's where all the kind of outcasts, and that's where you went to form a band, and that's where you went to wear daft trousers and have a daft haircut. And it was up until about 2 years before I applied to St Martin's. It had become a little bit more vocational and a little bit more focused. So that's always been a big interest, as well as music. So yeah, I could, but even then, I suppose I've got so much music in the blood that even, maybe I would be doing a painting or a print and hear something on the radio and think, oh, I need to get back in the studio.
Or down the record shop.
Yeah, exactly.
A quick thing about the art stuff, though, because you've been making art. Did you start doing the lino cutting and then move into kind of doing other stuff, or have you always been making art?
It's all part of the therapy. I needed something to focus on, because I had stuff going on in my life that was kind of, without going into detail, kind of bordering on the life-threatening, and I needed to get. I'd not done art for a long time. So I needed something to focus on. I thought I'd start painting again, but your mind can wander. And that's a great thing about painting, is your mind can wander in a good way or in a bad way. So I thought, what's a good medium? What can I do that involves sharp implements and the danger of cutting myself? And I thought lino cutting with lino prints was the thing to do, because it's quite a precise art, and it's kind of two art forms for the price of one. It's very sculptural. When you're actually doing it, and you have to concentrate, take your mind off it, and it's very, very painful. But then there's also the joy of printing, because you don't quite know. No two prints are exactly the same. Especially, maybe if you've got a big, proper old printer, but I was just kind of hand roller printing, so the textures you were getting were different. So it kind of worked on a couple of levels. It was very sculptural and then very pleasing. Actually doing the physical printing, so I did a club with Ivan Smag called Wrong Meeting. So I used to hand print the posters, which was a great idea until people realised that they were hand-printed posters and they would last about 10 minutes. It's quite flattering. I still get people to this day that come sidling up to me. And I know what they're going to say. They've got that look in their eye. They go, I'm sorry. I was like, but you nicked all the posters, didn't you? And the best one was I did a print of 2 girls on a kind of 1950s motorbike. And it was up on a wall on quite a busy road in London. And my office got a call from a young lady saying, my husband's has just come out of intensive care because he was riding his motorbike home from work and he saw the poster and he liked it so much he didn't see the car in front of him that had stopped. And he ended up in intensive care, and I'd quite like to give him a poster, which I thought was insane. You know, you imagine him just waking up out of intensive care and his wife goes, look, I got this for you, darling.
But apart from art, you know, just one more thing before I want to ask you something about record shops, but you read a lot as well, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, that's my relaxation. I'm lucky enough to have, that's the joy of separating work from home. You know, I go to work, I've got quite a big studio lined with records. I can listen to it at any volume I like because it's in the basement for 10, 12 hours a day. So the last thing I want to do really when I come home is listen to music. So I've got a pretty vast library, as I was saying to you earlier. I'm a kind of obsessive book buyer. I know that I'm not going to have the time to read it right there and then, but I'll buy it and put it in a library because I know whether it's a reference book, a history book, or even a novel, because, yeah, especially kind of pulp novels, are really good when you're writing a song. They're the ideal things to plagiarise, really, because the way they're written, they had to appeal to the kind of common man. But they had to get the point across, and they had to be very descriptive in kind of one line, as opposed to the flowery prose of a Henry James from the 19th century or something. They had to make their point very simply, and they're really good. That's what writing a good song is about, really, is making that point and making it very simply and very poetically. And Raymond Chandler and books from that era, and film noir as well. I have stolen many a line from and adapted them from films of the sort of, you know, film noir of the late 50s, purely because they are the masters of that precise, everyday kind of poetic description of love, death, etc.
I guess stealing and adapting is kind of a pretty good MO, really.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't be the first person in music to steal stuff. You know, Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin made a very nice career out of it.
But in terms of music, just for 1 second, obviously you're DJing all the time. You've got, you've always got loads of new stuff to play, different stuff to play. You're a very surprising DJ in the sense that you never necessarily know what you're going to get when you come and see you play. Where do you tend to get your music from?
Well, I usually, I mean, for dance stuff, it's usually either Black Market in London or Phonica, and they're very, very near each other. But I make life very difficult for myself because I like to buy vinyls, but then I'll get back to the studio, and as I'm listening to it, I'll record it onto CD with an analog line. I've got probably the world's last CD recorder. I tried to buy one. This one's on the way out, and I actually went out to try and buy a CD recorder. And people looked at me like I'd come beamed down from another planet. I mean, you can get CD players, but a CD recorder, no way. But I just like that you get the vinyl sound, and you don't have to lug hundreds of records around, you know, which in my physical condition can only be a good thing.
So we're going to put it out to questions very shortly. But can you tell us a bit about some of maybe someone you're working with at the moment, or some collaborations which may be forthcoming?
Well, there's possibly working. Well, I've already done some tracks. I produced some demos for a singer called Pete Molinari. Are you aware of his work? Mm-hmm. He recorded his first album in Billy Childish's kitchen. Because
there's a Chatham connection there,
isn't there? Yes, yeah, he's a Chatham boy, and he's got a beautiful voice. Somewhere between Patsy Cline and early Bob Dylan, very underrated. But he's very true to his art. I mean, it'd be very easy for him to go to a big record company and they could market him as the next big sort of singer-songwriter, you know. But he's very true to his art, and he doesn't want to go down that route. So I said, stick to me, kid, and you'll not sell any records. Perfect. Everybody's happy. But he's a joy. I mean, but a lot of the stuff. I mean, basically, I took demos and some of which he'd recorded with Liam Watson, and I basically tarted them up a little bit without kind of destroying too much. And yeah, that's the latest thing. Well, I did 3 demos. I don't know what's going to come of it. And obviously, the last thing before that was the War Paint album, which was last year.
And someone else that you were saying that you might be working with, someone that you'd met recently in your local surrounds.
Oh, Sam the sandwich shop man. Yeah, in my local sandwich shop, I noticed there was a guy working there, and he looked a bit like a pop star. He looked like he must have been 18, 19. He looked the part, and the people in the shop knew that I worked in music, so they kind of got us together. And he's at the Westminster School of Music, and he writes a good pop ditty. Again, he could go down that commercial route, and he could be another kind of. I can't even form the words. I can't even say the words Ed Sheeran. I find it difficult to even say those words. But they could market him as that kind of young, kind of poppy, modern sort of pop singer. But he doesn't want that. So again, he's going to stick with me, and he'll watch his career nosedive and sell 1,000 records
and become a cult property.
Exactly.
Shortly afterwards.
Yeah. and loathe and despise me for the rest of his life. But that's the way he wants to go.
One more thing, actually, before we pass it out to you lot. Brian Eno has this brilliant term, scenius, to describe the genius of a scene which kind of somehow...
I see what he's done there. He's done that horrible thing of adding 2 words together, hasn't he?
He has, but it's a brilliant concept.
Which is, don't get me started on that one.
All right, so you might not like words sandwiched together, but it is a brilliant idea because it definitely describes some things I know I've been involved with. You know, when you're involved in something, a part of a scene, and you know it's got its own kind of internal power, the kind of joining together of people from different places around an interest or around a particular project or desire to do something can sometimes create an environment which means things can happen that couldn't have happened anywhere outside of that environment. And you've been involved in a number of things over your life that I would imagine have had that feeling. Out of all the things you've been involved with, which one would you say has had that feeling to the greatest extent?
Well, I don't know. I've just never liked the word scene. You know, the word scenester is not a good thing to be described. It's a bit of a derogatory term. So I don't like scenes. And when we were talking earlier, you said, you tend to end things reasonably abruptly. And I think it's whenever I start getting associated with a scene, whenever I read in a DJ magazine or a music magazine that I'm part of a scene. That's me. I'm out of there. I'm off to, I'll go and do something else. But then I'm not part of that scene anyway. So I don't kind of change what I'm doing or change musical direction. I just kind of sidestep it because I kind of get lumped into things because I've been around for 20 years. And you do things like 9 o'clock drop. I'm part of the, I'm responsible for the post-punk scene, and then something else will happen, and a journalist will go to a club, and I'll play a certain kind of set. So all of a sudden, I'm part of this scene, or you're part of the rockabilly revival because a journalist has heard me play rockabilly, where I've been playing it for 10 or 15 years. A lot of that kind of bit, a lot of me being involved with scenes is down to kind of slightly lazy. Journalism, not from yourself, obviously, heaven forbid. So I've never been a fan of. I've never been a fan of the scene. But the first, I suppose, heart back. I'm not one of these people that looks back with rose-tinted glasses. I had a great time at Acid House, but if I could put my finger, that was the first time that I felt I was part of something. Because although I grew up with punk rock, I was only 13 in 1976. So it was still a little bit, the scene was older sort of guys, older teenagers. So although I loved punk, I didn't sort of feel part of a scene. I didn't live in London, I lived in the suburbs. But when House, it wasn't even Acid House. I mean, the Shum wasn't really a house club. It played everything, it played everything. And that was the first time that I felt part of a scene, because it was only 150, 200 people, the initial kind of acid house scene in London. And I was part of that, and I was writing a fanzine that was the kind of in-house fanzine. So, but then, I felt part of it. But then again, I got a little bit precious and up myself, shall we say, because you get, once you start getting involved with scenes and you think you're at the centre of a scene, you start getting a bit snotty and you kind of resent outsiders and Johnny-come-latelys. And you start getting a little bit possessive, and you actually, instead of becoming broad-minded, you get a little bit closed-minded. I think that's where my kind of hatred of being associated with the word scene comes from. It's not that I don't like scenes, it's probably myself that I don't, that attitude I had when I was 24 or 25 that I probably don't like, that I associate with scenesterism. So not scenes at fault, but me probably, really.
So if you find yourself in the centre of what other people are calling a scene, that's your moment to get out.
I don't make it, as I say, it doesn't affect, I still make the music I make, but I kind of try and distance myself. You can do that by, if a magazine phones up and says, oh, we're doing an article about this scene, and you just politely decline. So you kind of generally, you gradually get whittled out. Your name isn't associated with that scene. But obviously, if you're a DJ and someone says you're in a scene and you go, oh yeah, I'll talk about that, then you're forever associated with that scene. But that's what I'm saying. I just sidestep it. I'm not that bloody minded that I was like, right, okay, because other people like this music, it's called a scene, I'm going to go and do something else. It's just like kind of, it's easy to disassociate yourself from things by just not getting involved in any media hype that may be on the way.
Absolutely, because there is obviously a big difference between how things are in reality and then how they're presented to the outside world somehow. And if you're, what happens on the ground actually is the only thing that matters.
Especially with dance music journalism, which isn't the finest example of the journalist's art, let's be honest. Apologies to any dance music journalists that you probably all are, but
indeed, it is.
It's difficult to write. It's difficult to write about dance music. It's difficult because to me, dance music, it's so of the moment. It's so about being in the moment that it's very hard to translate that being in the moment on the dance floor into an article in DJ or Mixmag or whatever magazine you're writing for.
I can only say.
It is difficult,
indeed,
isn't it?
It is. It is. Agreed. But questions? Do we have the microphone to hand?
Hi. Kind of like yourself, I'm kind of interested in music that sits between genres, if you like, or kind of scenes or whatever you want to call it. So I guess I'm curious to know how you feel about how important are genres in general. I know this could be like another 2-hour chat, really, but
well, to me they never were. The whole thing. I mean, I wasn't brought up in the workhouse. I didn't have a bad upbringing, but it was quite boring. It was in the suburbs, so music from an early age was always an escape route for me. So you don't limit your escape routes. You want to try and absorb everything. So genres never really played that. Yes, I knew that's a dub record, that's a punk record. I knew there were genres, but I've always been of the opinion of never limit your escape routes, really. So I've never, I am aware of genres, but as I say, from the age of 12 or 13. I didn't want to limit my escape routes, so I kind of embraced pretty much everything. I mean, that was the great joy of punk rock, especially the Sex Pistols and John Lydon, was that that introduced me to roots dub music, to krautrock, experimental electronic stuff. That's I think I was lucky enough to read John Lydon interviews at the age of 13 in 1976. I mean, do you find? I mean, what's does that? It sounds like you're having a bit of a intellectual dilemma with genre hopping. That's the only thing is sometimes you can be accused of being a dilettante if you kind of dip in and dip out of things. And I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I do feel that I'm kind of skimming the surface sometimes, which is. That's the only drawback of that kind of genre hopping is you can be accused of dilettantism by people on the outside.
Well, it's their problem.
No, stay with it, my friend.
Thanks.
When you write remixes, I noticed in all of those ones you kept the original bass line on a bass guitar.
No, not always. Right. No, the Wooden Ships one, God bless them, I love their sound, but the file that they sent of the bass line was just absolutely unusable. It was just like a thick block like that, and it was unusable. So that's played, and on the Soft Rocks one, that's a kind of rock and roll adaptation of a more kind of dub, more dub bass line.
Right.
I mean, we do replay them. We do replay. We kind of copy them, but then we'll play them a little bit differently, because sometimes you get a bass track, and because I mean, someone said to me recently, it's like you can tell you listen to reggae because all your bass lines are a bit lazy and behind the beat and stuff. And sometimes we will copy the bass line, but we'll Tim, my engineer, will play them a little bit lazier, just a little bit groovier, especially rock bassists.
Yeah, right.
It's all a bit urgent and a little bit kind of hurried, so we kind of hang things back a little bit, But it depends. I mean, as I said, if the original track has got a synth bass, then we'll turn it into a live bass, and vice versa.
So, do you have any rules when you come to sit down to do a remix? Do you stick to any limitations or anything?
No, not really, because as I say, I've still got those words of a Glaswegian saying into my ear, "Fucking destroy it." So I've never, it's never been a great bother, and I think, as I say, even if you destroy something, you can still, as long as you retain the kind of the feel of the track, then I think I've done the job. There's probably people at record companies that would argue otherwise, but
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, I was just wondering, how long it takes you to make a track,
To make a track or do a remix?
Well, I guess both.
Yeah, I mean, it can like any piece of art. You ask a painter, how long does it take to do a painting? It can take a day, it can take a week, but usually a remix will take probably 2 or 3 days. But not. I never work. I kind of set myself again. It's part of that going to work. I don't. I've learned from experience that working through the night and working for 15, 20 hours is a bit of it's not a good way. The returns sometimes aren't good because you kind of lose all perspective of what you're doing. So I work a day. I work from 12 noon until 7 at night. So I do 7 hours. So it'll be 3 sets of 7 hours. But sometimes if I've been working for 3 or 4 hours and it sounds good, I'll then call it a day. I'll say to the engineer, look, this is sounding good. Let's, although we've only been working on it 3-4 hours, let's go away. Let's do something else. Let's come back tomorrow and listen to it in the cold light of day. Because so many times you've been working for 3 or 4 hours, something sounds really great, but because you've been listening to it for 3 or 4 hours, we'll add something, or we'll fuck with the filters, or we'll do something, and in the end you lose what you had. And if I'm doing a mix or one of my own tracks, as soon as I get that feeling of this sounds good, then it's time to stop and come in the morning, move on to something else, or listen to somebody else's music, and then come in the next day in the cold light of day, and if it still sounds good, carry on. I used to feel guilty if I did things really quickly. I used to feel a little bit guilty, but then as I read about how some of my favourite records were made, and they're all one-take wonders, and they were done in an afternoon, and the likes of Billy Childish records an album in an afternoon, and it's all one take, then that I kind of began to feel a bit better about not putting the hours in.
Thank you.
Hi. Speaking about the destruction you mentioned, was it your DJ set at Robert Johnson? Could you please tell us about
the infamous
story?
Yeah, basically, it was the 10th anniversary of Robert Johnson in Frankfurt, one of my favourite clubs, and I was playing with Rhythm and Sound, Mark Anestis, and they'd hired in some bass spins. I was told, that was the first thing when I got into the club. We've hired these bass spins. They're worth €10,000, and Rhythm and Sound did their thing, and I did my set. And with about 15 minutes to go, a young lady got up on stage, and I thought she was asking for a request. And I said, "What are you talking about?" In the end, she looked at me. She went, "I think there is fire." And I looked at the speakers, and there was indeed smoke coming from these €10,000 bass bins, and two guys. It was kind of half in and half outside. The venue, it was outside the club, but it had a canopy and a side like a tent. Then obviously, as soon as they took the speakers out of the tent, the wind caught them and they burst into flames. At which point, I'm beginning to panic because the guy from the speaker company is looking at me from across the dance floor, and he's making his way towards me. And I thought, well, there goes my wages. He just came up to me and very, very straight face. He put his arms around me and in like a thick German accent just said, "You have very hot records, yeah." I think that there is footage available on YouTube, but at the time there is footage if you put in Weatherall burning speakers, Robert Johnson. But it's really funny because the age in which we live in, there's people filming it, but then there's people filming the people filming it, filming the people filming it, while these two guys struggle out with this speaker on fire.
Do you know which tracks did it?
Oh, they were all pretty hot, I've got to be honest with you.
Who's next?
Well, gone out on a comedy anecdote, showbiz classic. There we go, the end.
But before the end, can we have another piece of music?
What do you want?
I think you're going to have to be the selector, seeing as you are the
It's
selector.
either that or another comedy anecdote.
Of which I know you have many, but I think we'd still rather hear some music too.
All right, fair enough. Let's see what we have here. Let's just put this in and see what happens. There's quite a nice a dub I did for a mix I did for Steve Mason, ex of the Beta Band. Let's see if that's on here. Oh yeah, here we go. Thank you. I mean that's kind of that for I know we should probably talk technicalities at these things, but that bass, that's a Juno 106, Bank B, preset 41, with a bit of tweaking. But it's basically we every now and again we'll do two mixes. That's the kind of dub of a dub. The original's got a live bass, and then I kind of always been fascinated. I've watched Adrian Sherwood work. I've seen film of Lee Perry work, where it's all very hands-on. Just takes a matter of minutes. Run the rhythm track. Get the bass going. So basically what we did a version with a live bass and then just copied the bass line with a Juno 106 and just did one kind of pass, same rhythm track, and then just live. I was fucking with the filters on the bass, which is what we do now and again. I did one for Nick Cave in the same way. I've done a few like that where we kind of do a dub of the dub. You know, we actually just look at each other and say preset 41. Yeah, okay, off we go.
I do have to ask you before we kind of finish up, because we've talked about kind of more about the band side of stuff and how that influenced you, but dub music, kind of what I know that's kind of another 2 hours in itself, but if you can sum it up, what's the influence that dub music's had on you?
Well, it's my entry into, it wasn't into dub, it was into kind of roots music. I read an interview with John Lydon, who said, you know, although I was a crazy maverick 13-year-old outsider punk rocker, I still need
like Bananarama?
I still needed to know the rules of how to be a maverick outsider punk rocker. John Lydon mentioned reggae, so I hot-footed it down to Revolution Records, my local record shop, and in the second-hand section they had an album by Big Youth called Dreadlocks Dread, and with ever-mounting trepidation, I took it home thinking, God, I hope I like this. I hope I'm into the punk rules, and put the needle onto the record. And the first thing I heard was Big Youth chanting, "You yabby yabby you, chant the rebel sound." I get you. Excellent. It's outsider music. It's rebel music, which roots music at that time. Was. It was, you know, especially if it was made by Rastafarians who were being terrorised by the government in Jamaica at the time. So I immediately made that connection between reggae, or roots reggae, being outsider music, and also in the same interview, John Lydon said that he listened to reggae music with the bass up full, the treble up full, and not a lot going on in the middle. So basically, I set my little dance set record player, I had a little EQ thing on it, set it like he told me to, and then even on a shitty little dance set, I kind of got the power. It kind of moved me, that just the rhythm of it, just the space in it, it was like music from outer space, really. That was what attracted me to it, and that's kind of what's been in my, I suppose it's been in my blood for 35 years. I mean, I don't consciously, with that Steve Mason one, we did consciously go in to make to do a dub version. But even when I'm doing something else, I've still got that kind of lazy bass thing going on, and certain dub kind of effects going on in my head. Really, it's one that and kind of rockabilly and certain elements of glam rock, and also the work of Martin Hannett. Although I don't go in and consciously try and recreate any of those sounds. They are so ingrained in me. I can't help but kind of make them come out. Even if they are approximations, I can't help but make them come out when I get near a desk.
So rebel music, outsider music, what do you think that is now? I don't necessarily mean new stuff, but what does that mean for you now?
Well, anything that upsets the old folk, really. I mean, that's the great thing. I mean, I hear there's a lot of sort of dubstep stuff I listen to, and I listen to it, and it's like, Jesus, this is like being hectored by teenagers on a night bus, which is good. It's not meant for me. It's kind of scary. There's still, of course, there'll always be music that upsets the old folk, but the only thing you can't do now is actually say there's one thing. You can't say there's punk rock, or you can't say there's acid house. There's still lots of scary music, and there's still lots of music upsetting the old folk and offending people, but you can't lump it into one area. And I don't think that feeling, especially when you're a teenager, of wanting to be an outsider and wanting to have something of your own, I don't think that'll ever disappear, although the media will jump on it quicker because of how fast information technology works. They'll water it down, but that'll never, just because the media is watering it down, doesn't mean to say that it will destroy that feeling. That feeling of that I had when I was a 13-year-old or 14-year-old, that I still get to a certain amount today. No amount of media hype can kill that spirit, I don't think.
Exactly, because it doesn't matter what anyone says on the ground. If it's good, it's good.
Yeah, basically.
I think on that note, we need to say, Andrew Weatherall, thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.